Good afternoon, the internet. My name's Josiah, and I want to talk to you a bit about unaccountable power. And for the first time, we have a prop. So this, which I will link down below, is the closest thing to a Bible as I have in my life. And it's quotes from a fictional book, quotes from a fictional character in a science fiction book. It's full of little bits of wisdom. I'll give you some examples. You live and learn, or you don't live long. One man's magic is another man's engineering. Supernatural is a null word. A little flag for all of you who's a big fan of Golden Age or Silver Age of science fiction. The phrase "we, I, you" simply must designate something that need not be done. That goes without saying is a red warning. Of course means you had best check it yourself. These small change cliches and others like them, when read correctly, are reliable channel markers. There's a lot of these quotes that I have made big decisions with the help of. And some of them are just like obvious, but sometimes obvious advice is necessary. For example, in handling a stinging insect, move very slowly. Or similarly, never frighten a little man. He'll kill you. And that's hyperbolic and it's from a fictional setting, right? But it says something about the nature of frightening insecure people. It's a terrible idea. There's some very bad gender politics in here, but otherwise it's really phenomenal. Tilting at windmills hurts you more than the windmills. But there's one that I was thinking of in terms of this recording. And it's this. Any government will work if authority and responsibility are equal and coordinate. This does not ensure good government. It simply ensures that it will work. But such governments are rare. Most people want to run things but want no part of the blame. This used to be called backseat driver syndrome. And that's what I was thinking about in terms of what I wanted to say. The election is nigh, and I had been thinking that this is the choice, depending on what happens. If Trump wins, we have to save the country. But if Biden wins, we have to save the planet. Right? I think that the big problem with Trump winning this election this time, the biggest problem, there are lots of big problems. The biggest problem is climate change. Is that if he's in charge, the fact that we'll have to fight off autocracy will make climate change possible. There will be no room for it. But if Biden wins, we have a chance. He said some very clearly correct things in a way no one in politics at his level has said about climate change. But when I was trying to come up with, a construction around Tuesday's choice is about saving the country versus saving the world, the construction sort of fell apart, and it led back to what is the sort of proximate problem that we're facing in American governance. And when I say governance, I really mean how is the country run, right? Who decides things? How do those decisions get made? Which is a very difficult thing to think about when you're thinking about a country this big, with mixes of media and democracy and representation and insider dealing and corporate structures. Figuring out how this country actually operates is something I've never been able to wrap my head around with any sort of precision. But the reason that it has become so insane and so dysfunctional in the last 40, 50 years is because of an unholy alliance of unaccountable power and bigotry. Just noticed the framing on on how much of my head you could see. And now I'm in shadow. Bunch of bad choices. Anyway, unaccountable power and bigotry. I don't really want to talk about bigotry right here because I want to focus on what I mean by unaccountable power. And by unaccountable power, I specifically mean the super rich and the megacorps. We have allowed the loopholes in our meritocracy to create a new aristocracy. Right? The people who have billions of dollars or who have control over trillions represent a new noble class where they have so much power that it cannot be wrested from them by certainly any legal means. If you have $1 billion, you can spend, whatever it is, 6-10% of it every year and never lose a dime. You can spend it on anything you want, including your whack job, or actually your whack job or other political priorities, right? You can just fund $50 million, $100 million a year in think tanks and influence peddling and never even bite into your nest egg, right? You still have $1 billion at the end of the year. And part of what people in that position end up doing, either themselves or certainly their children, definitely their children's children, is they end up insulating themselves from the consequences of their actions and the consequences of their decisions. And this has two different impacts on them. On a personal level, it ruins their judgment because you have these people who don't have any experience of suffering the consequences of failure. Right? When they fail, nothing happens to them. They don't lose their house. You can lose $100 million and it just doesn't make any difference. Certainly not about where you live or what car you drive or like where your kids go to school, right? It might make your accountant freak out, but like it doesn't have the same sort of impact that a personal failure for a not obscenely rich person has. So it ruins their judgment because they become unfamiliar and unacquainted with the nature of cause and effect as it relates to their own choices. But it also objectively orients them away from the outcomes of their actions, especially when those people who are so powerful that they're insulated then use their power, their money power, to get political power. Now they're objectively oriented not towards the people that they're supposed to represent, right? They have moved into a gilded, not a gilded, but a guarded community. Their kids go to private school. They fly around on a private plane. They can ruin much of the country. They can ruin much of the world and not have to even see that ruination, which is excruciatingly dangerous for these people in charge because they're insulated from the consequences. They're literally disconnected from the information about what a good decision or a bad decision would be. They cannot be left in charge. And this is why, for the people, by the people, that's not just a moral aspiration. That's literally what it takes to have a government that runs in accordance with the needs of the people, which is the only sort of reasonable way to have a government anyway. But these super rich people don't have any mechanism in their life to tie them back into the quality of our lives, or the quality of the planet's environment, or the quality of the court systems. right? They don't care, they don't have to, and they don't. And it's a sort of learned sociopathy where they still experience fear, but they never experience consequences. And so they can go off into bizarre niche interests, fund those niche interests, and those niche interests aren't necessarily connected in any way to their job responsibilities, their personal lives. You know, it's the governance of the country is supposed to be the command and control structure of the country as a whole. But when you have people who only care about themselves in charge of a structure that large, they lack the basic competence on a personal level to even have a running familiarity with the issues at hand. And I've said all this calmly, but I want to say this more clearly. The super rich are destroying the country and the world, and they need to be removed from power, or billions of people will die because of climate change. I believe AOC said it, might have been somebody else, that every billionaire is a policy failure. Our tax structure and our economy has created a class of nobility who have all of the problems associated with inherited wealth that noble lines have. These people are not tested against their competence. They are tested against their resources. Our meritocracy, flawed as it is, has been exploited to the point where it can no longer distinguish someone who's competent and someone whose parents were competent. The only reason you know who Donald Trump is because his daddy was successful. If he didn't get hundreds of millions of dollars given to him, no one but the people who went to the gas station he worked at would know who he is. And that is the sort of unaccountable power that I'm talking about. And when you give people unaccountable power based on heredity, eventually you give it out to a psychopath. Right? Because you're just handing out an amount of money to whoever you have as a child that is so large that there's no way to spend it all and there's no way to lose it all. So no matter how ruinously incompetent you are, our flawed meritocracy sees you as a success. And this is because of things simply like the estate tax. There's a reason that we don't allow family dynasties, because family dynasties give you people like Trump. And that's what I wanted to say today, is that we have a system that creates, permits, and supports sources of unaccountable power, which is, as much as anything, the thing that America was created to avoid. Thank you for your time.